Call to order a regular meeting for the Normal Town Council for September 19th, 2016. Please call the roll.
Mayor Kus.
Here.
Mr. Fritzen.
Here.
Mr. Preston.
Here.
Mr. McBride.
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz. Here. Mr. McCarthy.
Here.
Ms. Gaines.
Here.
We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our first item of business is the omnibus vote, and these are items that will be taken with one vote unless a council member would like to pull an item for discussion. And I would like to be excused from voting on any bills I may have incurred in my duties as mayor. Mr. McBride?
I'd like to be excused from the WGLT bill.
Thank you.
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Items on the omnibus agenda for vote tonight are approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of September 6, 2016, and approval of Town of Normal expenditures for payment as of September 14, 2016. A resolution to accept a bid and award a contract to Rowe Construction Company, a division of United Contractors Midwest Incorporated, in the amount of $1,181,915.91 for the 2016 motor fuel tax community development block grant street resurfacing project. A resolution to accept a proposal for auditing services from Lauterbach and Amann LP, a CPA firm. Conditional resolution partially approving the final plat of the 11th addition to the Pheasant Ridge subdivision. A resolution partially approving an amended final development plan for the Linden Trails PUD, that's at 808 South Linden Street. And an ordinance accepting permanent and temporary easements required for the Ironwood Force Main project and approval of compensation of $16,242.50 for those easements. Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen.
Aye.
Mr. Preston.
Aye.
Mr. McBride.
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz. Aye. Mr. McCarthy.
Aye.
Ms. Gaines.
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye. We have a number of items of general orders tonight. The first is a resolution partially approving the preliminary plan for the Lofts North End PUD. And that's at the southeast intersection of Parkside and Rab Road.
Move approval.
Second.
Is there a discussion on this item? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Preston.
Aye.
Mr. McBride.
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz. Aye. Mr. McCarthy.
Aye.
Ms. Gaines.
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen.
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye. Item 7 is concerning the same property, a resolution partially approving the final development plan for the Lofts North End PUD. Move approval. Thank you.
Second.
Discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. McBride.
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz. Aye. Mr. McCarthy.
Aye.
Ms. Gaines.
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen.
Aye.
Mr. Preston.
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye. Third item for the same property, a resolution conditionally and partially approving the final plat for the Lofts North End PUD.
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Discussion? Please call the roll.
Ms. Lorenz. Aye. Mr. McCarthy.
Aye.
Ms. Gaines.
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen.
Aye.
Mr. Preston.
Aye.
Mr. McBride.
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye. Item 9 is a resolution authorizing execution of a redevelopment agreement with Mr. Nicholas Africano for the demolition of the former ISSCS Administration Building and renovation of the former ISSCS Infirmary Building with the One Normal Plaza planned unit development.
Move approval. Second.
Discussion on this item. Ms. Gaines?
As we are, that land will be deeded back to us. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so with that, our hope is that we might be able to get someone to come in and develop that.
Yes, that's the expectation, that we will market that property to a variety of developers to see if we can find a developer that's interested in building investing in a real estate project, certainly something that's compatible with the surroundings. And whatever is proposed has to go through a public process, and the council ultimately has the authority to approve or deny the project, what its nature, its appearance, and so forth.
So with that, we would gain some property tax money back and things like that over time?
That, absolutely. There would be potential revenue from a land sale if the land is sold. In some cases, it might be donated for the right project. But whatever goes there would generate real estate property taxes that the town would capture as part of the existing TIF fund that exists on that project. And the hope would be that over the course of the TIF, we would generate enough income from that project to ultimately pay the town back its investment in the demolition.
Right.
That's the theory. There is a proviso in the agreement that for the first 2 years, and frankly, it would probably take us a while to get a project moving anyway, but the property owner, current property owner, has asked during the first 2 years that there be the option to purchase the property back from the town, because Mr. Africano will deed over that property. We will own it, but if the agreement is approved as is drafted, he will have the right to buy it back during the first 2 years.
And is there any set price that he would buy that property
No set
back?
price, but it would be up to the council to accept or reject any offer. I mean, I think it would be the expectation that the town would want to recover most, if not all, of its investment, but there is no, he could offer some other price, and then you would have the ability to accept or reject that offer.
Because it looked like he was gonna, if he did do that, he would like to leave it as green space.
That's what he is,
And therefore, there wouldn't be any real property tax fed back to the
correct.
community.
I think it would be his desire to leave it as green space, which certainly that green space is nice, and we have a lot of it up there, but there would be no revenue generation if there's no development there.
Mr. Fritzen?
Well, Ms. Gaines started to venture in on some of the questions I had there, because the green space would not, which is Mr. Africano's preference as stated in the report, that he would like to buy it back and turn to that. So there's no TIF funds, there's no, probably likely a decrease in property value, I guess. I don't know. There's a big liability sitting on the property
Right.
right now, so
Right.
that affects so determining what the value is.
There
kind
would
of
be,
difficult.
yeah, the land has value, so there would be some
That's about-
property taxes
yeah.
paid on the land. That's it.
I guess one thing that, in just following the reporting and the public, the public's consumption of the thing, I think, and it's been pointed out, and I think it's worth repeating, that what has happened at One Normal Plaza over the years, there's been a lot of good redevelopment and restoration done on that property. So, there are a lot of very vital properties there now that weren't such back when the property was originally sold and started kind of feeling its way around how to develop this monster. So it's come a long ways, and it's unfortunate that a property like this that is so prominent and on a relatively busy street has fallen into the disrepair it has, but as also the report pointed out, it was in disrepair when Mr. Africano purchased it, and 9 of the 11 properties he purchased are good properties today in their redevelopment. I guess I come down to, and we've heard, all of us, I think, have probably heard over the years from neighbors up there who are anxious for something to happen. It's not just in disrepair, but it's also a liability in that there has been some vandalism and different. It's a bit of a magnet for some young folks to have an adventure, and some have gotten into trouble having those adventures. So that's another reason for it to go. I guess a question I have is that what if we don't do this? How much further into disrepair can something fall before we have to require some kind of remediation from the owner or whatever, if we aren't willing to do a deal like this? Where's that leave us? Where would that leave us if we didn't do something like that?
Well, you'd have two options. You could use our vacant buildings ordinance, and you could attempt to compel the property owner to remove the structure, which is really required in our current ordinance. We've actually allowed this property to continue longer than the ordinance would generally permit because we were all hoping to find some reuse of the building. And I think that's unlikely, to put it mildly, at this point. So you could attempt to compel through a court action and force the owner to remove the building at his expense, actually probably both buildings, because they're both vacant and would fall under our vacant building ordinance. Or you could just try to secure it, board it up, and leave it. I'm not sure that's a good option, but that certainly, you could just leave it and let it sit and wait for something to happen.
I was afraid that might be an option. I mean, it's not very secure now, obviously, and I think there have been some attempts to secure it, but
Yes. It is a bit of an attractive nuisance.
Yeah.
You're right, Mr.
so,
Woodson.
I think, given the options, you kind of try to weigh, where would we go if we didn't do this? Where does this get us? And it's not an easy decision. I don't think by any means, because of the public-private agreement and part of the agreement. But we've had a lot of success with public-private agreements, and at the end of the day, I feel like we are extremely fortunate where we're sitting today that we can even consider doing something like this. So there'd be a lot of communities that would not be able to consider doing something like this, that they just wouldn't have the resources available to them. And because of our fiscal management and our track record in these types of developments, I have a little bit of comfort in that we can make this work out for us. I'm not a big fan of the 2 years and the buyback. I'd rather see it turn into a productive piece of property that is going to generate some property tax revenue, that is going to generate some TIF funds. That was one of my questions too, is if a developer were to come in, wouldn't they be looking to put some of those TIF funds, to use as well in the redevelopment? And so it wouldn't all be coming back to us. I wouldn't think there would be some negotiation there. I know it's not an automatic, but with the way the TIFs have operated, it's put us in a position to put some money back into a project. So that's which way do we go with that? And again, like I said, I would rather see it redevelop into something that's going to be productive and contributing.
I would note on your last point, would a developer require TIF dollars to make the project work? And, it covers a lot of ground. It depends on what the project is. It depends on who the developer is on that project. But we've recently found developers turning down TIF dollars. They might take a land grant, but because TIF initiates a prevailing wage, a lot of developers look at their projects and say, it's a net gain. I don't gain anything by taking the TIF dollars. So sometimes they don't do that. But it's just really hard to pin that down to say that's the direction it's going to go, because we don't know what a developer might have in mind for that.
It wasn't one of the thoughts with this building to perhaps become a center for not-for-profits and whatever. I think that was one of the things, if I remember right, an idea that was kicked around. And you mentioned that the right development might even cause us to say, we'll contribute this to that development. So that's the kind of thing I suppose could happen there that might trigger us to be willing to work with a developer that way.
Just add a couple of thoughts, if I may. If in this case we're talking new construction, there are still some ways to use TIF for new construction, but it's much more limited. You can use TIF dollars to write down a portion of the interest cost associated with financing a project, and you could use it for the extension of some utilities. But since it's new construction, TIF would be limited. There's some application. The other thing, just to respond, Mr. Fritzen, to your concern over maybe not redeveloping the site and just leaving it green space, just to remind you that this agreement, as drafted, would give Mr. Africano the right to make an offer. You have no obligation to accept it. He may offer you double, well, I doubt that would happen, but double what you paid, and you have no obligation to accept it. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you.
Mr. McBride?
A couple of questions, excuse me, specifically for staff. This has been characterized over the last several days as giving Mr. Africano, using the word giving the owner of the property $500,000. And wouldn't it be more accurately characterized to say that we are reimbursing up to $496,000? And by the use of the word reimbursement, there has to be some sort of documentation of actual costs for raising the building associated with that.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
you're exactly right. It would be a reimbursement once the building has been torn down and the property owner can document that this is the cost that was incurred, then we would reimburse that expense.
So we're not just handing a check over and saying,
He has to
"Here you
perform
go."
first.
And then the other question, and I'm not asking you to predict the future here, but again, I'll use the word characterize. How would you characterize our chances of recouping a percentage of this cost, either through TIF funds or through a resale or any of our other options?
I would characterize our chances as good of recouping a significant share of the cost. Will we recoup the entire $500,000, particularly if you consider the interest, time value of money and the opportunity cost? That remains to be seen, but I do think there's the opportunity to recoup a considerable portion of that $500,000, maybe the entire amount. Because I do think there will be interest in this property. I think there's, it's a very attractive site, particularly with the restoration that will occur of the neighboring building, the infirmary, which is really a very attractive, probably in terms of architecture, more significant than the administration building, as well as everything else that has occurred out there. I think it will be an attractive site for development. So I think I'm optimistic we'll be able to attract a developer to undertake a nice project. Whether that's going to be residential or commercial remains to be seen.
We've all heard, I think, some concerns coming at this from different angles. I mean, we've heard the historic preservation concern, although I would say, personally speaking, that the town of Normal's track record for historic preservation is very strong and should speak for itself. And then I've also heard the concern, as I think we all have, about the amount of money involved. I mean, it is a lot of money. There's no question about that. But I also think when you look at the impact of the neighborhood, the disrepair, the liability, just the unsightliness, this is not the easy thing to do, but I believe it's the right thing to do.
I'll comment on that too, Mr. McBride, because having dealt with this property for as long as I've been on council and mayor, in the realm of historic preservation, sometimes built too well is a liability. And that building was built for a very specific purpose and very much to its time, which really has hindered the ability to market that building for reuse. It's broken up into very small rooms and offices with very substantial walls, which would cost a lot of money to remove. And we have had people look at that building for rehab, and everyone's walked away. They said it won't cash flow. The numbers won't make it work. So you're right, and thank you for your comments on this council stand on historic preservation and some of the things we've done as a community. Ms. Lorenz?
Thank you. I've been deliberately waiting to hear how the discussion was going on this, and I guess I'll weigh in now. I acknowledge what Mr. Fritzen was saying as far as we've had a very successful record of public and private partnerships, dating far back before I was even on this council, so, it's a good track record to have, and I think it's a testimony to the fact that we keep our financial house in order, and we're able to be an agent of change on things like this project and other projects that have come to pass up to this point. So having said that, however, there's a however here, I do have some reservations about the details of this deal. And I think when I compare it to some of the other things that I know have come before our council here recently, that public-private partnership has been towards a very specified end, in the sense that, we know that this collaboration will lead towards a greater use of an asset for potential tourism, as was a case recently, or returning of a neighborhood to its integrity of single-family dwellings. And so that has been a piece that has helped me wrap my head around those previous sort of precedent-setting cases. On this one, I do have reservations that it seems rather open-ended. We demolish, which probably is really the only option for this building, sadly, but as points have been already made. But then what? And so the deal right now feels kind of thin to me. The 2-year waiting period is a problem in my mind. It feels a little hand-tying. And not having another sort of constructive picture painted for us right now. For instance, another developer maybe at the table saying, yeah, okay, the town does its part and helps clear the site, and Mr. Africano does his part as the current owner, and then developer XYZ does their part. That would, to me, feel a little more substantive, and I could wrap my head around that. In the absence of that, I'm feeling a little squeamish.
Ms. Gaines?
Well, the question I was asking was related to will it maybe be developed versus just green space? Just green space. I mean, green space is great to have. The building is, I have been on this council for a very long time, and in fact, shortly after the town obtained the whole property there, and it has been an issue for all of these years. And I even have friends who had, when their kids were in high school, they were breaking into that building. And people were getting scraped up and hurt, and it's a terrible accident waiting to happen. I guess the one couple things. Somebody had written, and I think we probably all saw it, that, we need to just quit spending money on things that don't help the town and put it on roads. Well, I do want to point out that we have budgeted very well, and we're putting a lot of money in our roads. So none of this is taking away from any of the streets, of the roads, and the repair and the replacement. All of those are budgeted, and, we are preparing for that. When it comes to the developer or development there, also having sat through all of this early on, the place is developed beautifully up there. Mm-hmm. We set some standards. We said it needed to fit within the campus setting, what any building that went up was going to look like. You can't just come in and put up a pole building and put something in there, because that would take away from what that whole area and the historical piece to it is. And so it is a beautiful place. It's a very peaceful place. If you ever go up there and drive through or walk through or just go up and sit, it's a beautifully peaceful place. And unfortunately, that building's making it not as pretty. Mm-hmm. I can't hardly see that there wouldn't be somebody who would want to come in and develop that, because it's such a great, they always say location, 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 and I think this is one of those locations. So I'm not as worried about that. I mean, if it wouldn't be the worst thing that ever happened if there was more green space there. We might not make as much money back, but we're still going to be selling the property back, the lot in and of itself. So I don't see it as, kind of like you said, kind of seeing it as thin per se. I see it as another one of those things where if we're going to have a community that people feel good about, and that as we sit on the council, we feel good about that people will be safe around that building, I think this is the right move.
Excuse me, I somewhat agree with you, Ms. Gaines. You know, as I look at this, I don't see that there's a way to lose on this, given the way this deal is structured. If you take a look at One Normal Plaza up there, it is a very much a park-like setting that you alluded to. So if it remained green space, that works for the nature of the property as a whole. If it develops, as you pointed out, it's going to develop in a style that reflects what is happening up there. So I see either scenario working out to the town's benefit, to the benefit of the citizens of the town. You know, if this comes before me while I'm sitting as mayor, I'm certainly going to work to see that the town is made whole on this property, whatever happens. I think that is something that we should and can do. So, and that's the way this agreement is structured. So, I just don't see I don't see a downside. I don't see a landmine, if you will, in this project. Mr. McCarthy.
Well, as usual, as I waited long enough, everybody asked all my questions, which is, I think, a good thing. I guess I want to echo your last comments and maybe extend just a little bit, is that as I look at this and had a little bit of an email exchange earlier, maybe some of us got it or all of us got it. And I think that I like the deal, and as I hashed this out with a citizen emailing me this afternoon about this, I've really come to the same conclusion that you know, if the building is raised and the asbestos is gone and the play/liability hazard is taken away, which I appreciate as a young man having lots of abandoned buildings around where I grew up, did get a scrape or two myself, but assuming that's all taken away and removed, and the significant input that we hear from time to time from the neighbors around that building, if that's going away and Mr. Africano repurchases the building, then we've done a really good thing. And the town is made whole on its upfront investment, presumably. Presumably we won't sell it for $1, or whoever is on the council at that time when that happens. But if not, if it gets developed, I think the only concern I could ever have, I think, about the development side of this is if it becomes one single-family home. And then I think under those scenarios, I think it would take an extraordinarily long time for us to be made whole unless we got a significant purchase price for the land. Other than that, save that one single scenario, I can't imagine that over a period of time, if we get some purchase price money back, and we get to retain the vast majority of the TIF dollars. And I think that's one thing that many people haven't heard, is that is a TIF, in fact, and we would get an increased amount, just not a normal property tax rate, that we would eventually come out all right in this. And the community wins, and the neighborhood wins all along the way. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Preston.
Thank you. I think it's probably safe to say there's some general consensus around the table and probably around the room and beyond for anybody who's even really driven past the property that it's one that is probably best not standing. I think that a lot of the points made up here revolved around that, and I would be one to kind of fall into that line of thinking as well. Looking beyond once the property would be demolished, though, I guess I share a little bit of concern, much like Councilwoman Lorenz, at the 2-year option agreement that Mr. Africano would have to make an offer to purchase back the property. And one of the things that I was thinking, working in real estate myself, is, if he wants to utilize his 2 years potentially to go out and try and raise funds to purchase back the land and potentially keep it as green space. Part of me wishes that if that was his intent now, I wish that would have been maybe 2 years ago, and he could have handled this project and the demolition himself without us having to get involved in the ownership of it. Neither here nor there at this point, but I guess I'm wondering, if this is an initiative and an idea that he's wanting to pursue now, why couldn't that have happened originally without our involvement in the first place, I guess, is one of my thoughts. And as part of that, kind of going along with this 2-year option, it just, I'm not entirely convinced that best use of this space at this point is either green space or development, but I'm not sure I'm sold on the idea that we have to wait 2 years to figure it out. And that's really just, that clause is something that I've struggled with all weekend and still do this evening. And for me, that's probably, a game changer in this agreement. That's the one clause that I keep coming back to, and I don't know necessarily if I want to propose an amendment that agreement, or that clause be taken out of this agreement, or just want to, vote as it is. But it's something that I've wrestled with and still am.
I would just comment that, as some of the other comments made around the table, I don't see the urgency on this. We have dealt with this property for 20-some years, trying to get something done, and now all of a sudden, it's a dire issue to get something happening immediately. I think it was a reasonable request, given the efforts that Mr. Africano has done on this property over the years. He has, in good faith, tried to find developers to do something with that property and has not been successful. So I'm not as concerned about the time frame. Further on this?
Well, maybe it might be, and I'm not sure, it doesn't really bother me either, the 2-year period, but maybe it's worth asking what was the reasoning behind the inclusion of that clause?
If I may, it was a request from the property owner to add that provision, and as he explained to me, from a business perspective, he has not in the past been in a position to come up with that kind of money, but there is a possibility, given some developments in his own business enterprise, that he thinks within 2 years he may be in a position to raise the funds, but he clearly isn't now and hasn't been in a position to do that in the future. But there's some changes in his business that could potentially make that option viable. And so he asked if that could be inserted. It was a late addition in our negotiations, and staff agreed to include it. I think it's a reasonable request, and I think, frankly, if he were able to purchase the property for essentially what the town has invested, I think that would be a good outcome. Otherwise, we do run a risk of trying to find a developer, and I think it's a reasonable risk. I think we can, but that can develop a project that will provide the same return over a several-year period. I think it's like a 18-year period that's left on the TIF. So we thought it was a reasonable request, but certainly if the council's uncomfortable with that provision can be removed. But I think there are good reasons why he wasn't able to do that in the past, and he's contemplating there might be an opportunity, and I said might be, in the future, but I certainly no guarantee that he would even make an offer to purchase the property.
So in short, we have an opportunity as a council to do something now to eliminate this problem we've been dealing with for decades.
Correct.
It is budgeted. This has been in our budget, so there's no change there. And from the ownership perspective, it's a cash flow issue, and one that we're hoping might change within that 2 years. And if not, we'll proceed with other options. Is that a fair summary? Thank you.
Any further on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
No.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz? No. Mayor Kus?
Aye. The resolution is approved. That concludes our general orders. We have one item of new business, which is a request to adjourn to executive session to discuss matters of personnel. Before taking that motion, are there comments or concerns from the council? Motion to adjourn? Oh, you do have one?
I was just going to remind everybody of Worldwide Day of Play this weekend in Uptown, and Oktoberfest as well in Uptown Normal, so come get your kid play on.
And we're bringing in a polka band.
And bringing in a polka band and an Uptown Normal.
I could just,
Papa.
I just want to acknowledge Mercy Davison here today, who's back there giggling with Mr. Francois. He does that to people. Today, we hosted the 5th Annual Illinois Bike Summit in Normal, and I think we've done, is this the third one? Well, we didn't do all 5. I mean, we hosted 3 of the 5, and it was a huge success. Mercy carried most of the water for that, so thank you for doing that, Mercy. And I think we had 260 people here. The Illinois Secretary of Transportation was attended and spoke. First time he's ever attended the Bike Summit, and I understand his comments were very well received by the attendees. So there was actually folks actually started coming in over the weekend and did some riding on our trail, which they love. And then there's, I think, a group staying tomorrow. I think there's a kind of a follow-up session tomorrow. So it was a very nice event, and we were certainly happy to host. I know Wayne Aldrich he was a presenter. Did we have anybody else present? Wayne was up there this morning, and I understand did a great job, and the mayor did an intro this morning. So it was a nice event. Thanks, Mercy.
Move approval.
Second.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz? Aye. Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye, we are adjourned to executive session.